Testing, 1, 2.
Oliver, are you having councillors up here?
No, it's just in the front there.
That's all right.
Yep.
Stephen's here, Stephen Moriarty's
Oh, and Councillor Hay.
and Councillor Hay.
Yep. And then we'll probably utilise where. Good evening, everyone. We might it's 5:33. We did have a link out to go out to broadcast, so we might get started shortly. I'm just getting the go ahead from upstairs, and I'll hand the mic over to Councillor Sanders to give us a quick welcome.
Hello, everybody. Big audience. Good evening, and thank you for taking the time to come to this evening to contribute to our draft 2024-2025 budget community consultation session. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land on which we meet and acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge my council colleagues. Now, Deputy Mayor couldn't make it, and we have Councillors Amanda Hay, Kerry Cryer and Stephen Moriarty. Thank you so much for coming. I will apologise for Councillor Chalk and for the Mayor for not being able to attend tonight. This is the second time we've gone out to the community to seek feedback on our financial planning for the coming year, and tonight's session is the first of 3 to be held across the region for the next 7 days. As well as tonight's session, we'll be holding similar events in the same time slot on, are we still doing the Thursday the 9th of May? Yes? Oh, we are, at the Boona Golf Club, and Monday the 13th of May, 6 p.m. at Tamborine Mountain Library. Once again, thank you for taking the time to participate in these invaluable sessions. I'll now hand over to David and Oliver to talk you through the rest of the process for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders, for that introduction, and welcome everybody tonight. It is those that attended or those that are familiar with the process from last year, it is a bit different in a way that you'd recall by this stage last year we had a draft budget, we had the basic mechanics of a draft budget underway. The little change this year is the election, the timing of the election in March, the declarations, getting the elected members onboarded to go through and start having council meetings and everything else. That's probably taken a big process, and coincidentally enough, we had the very first budget workshop today. So in terms of a draft budget position, we've got a draft budget position, but that hasn't necessarily been endorsed enough to go for community consultation. So we're a little behind in the schedule, but that's not through the undoing of council. It's just with the timing of the elections and getting we've had a significant change with elected members and getting up to speed with all the onboarding requirements through governance and meetings and everything else. Sort of the budget's taken a little bit of a backseat for the time being, but we're certainly well in process now to get a draft budget out for consideration for council and then start going through the process. That being said, the context for this year's budget engagement is more around what we saw last year was the opportunity for questions and answers and submissions that were received by council and considered by council in the whole scheme of things in terms of how they fit in those services. And I'll rattle off a couple of examples from last year. Again, the process was that the suggestions and the feedback were vetted as part of the community consultation process, but then vetted by the elected members and the officers to see how they would impact or not the budgets and going forward. And some of those suggestions last year, just a very couple, was around extending whether it was a possibility to extend the opening hours of the pool. This year round, that was extended through April, and I think the general feedback was that was well received, and that's something that part of the considerations of the budget is. That's an extra month of operating costs for the pools. That's an extra cost that has to be considered, and whether or not then there's a continuation that would have to be for the council to go forward. So, the feedback is really this time round. Once we sort of go onto the Let's Talk Scenic Rim page, and I've got one of the staff members to help us run through, is we're seeking feedback on some high-level services. You would have recalled probably, and I can't remember the exact date, but council endorsed and released the services catalogue, which is part of the process in in highlighting what services are provided by council. You know, in that particular catalogue itself, it identified 34 high-level services, and some of there's sub-services with each of those, but in general terms, they're categorised in 34 major services. And that starts you know, making an informed presentation to the community about, you know, for every $100 of rates, this is what its particular funding, and that's what we've gone out with in the community consultation. Is it doesn't sort of matter whether it's last year's budget, this year's budget, but it's understanding where and what the rates revenue are funding. On top of the feedback that's being sought on those high-level services, there's an ability, you know, for the residents to prioritise those services and deem which one of those are deemed to be of higher in ranking as compared to the others. What that will aid is the councils in making some informed decisions around where the community may see the priority of the services lie, and that will help shape future decision making for future, not only this budget but future budgets, when it comes to determining the strategic direction of council. Similarly, with the prioritisation of those services, what council's also seeking is, again, further input around any service suggestions and infrastructure suggestions. Last year we received around 41 submissions in total, and some of those included considerations for dog park off leash, lighting, new sporting infrastructure, and not everything can be considered, because I mean, in the grand scheme of things, council's currently, you know, managing about $1.2 billion of assets. So the more assets that we add onto our books, there's going to be more operating costs to maintain and keep those assets as well as the existing assets in line. So, you know, we have to be mindful in terms of what our current rateable base currently sits, and whether it's sustainable to start adding more and more infrastructure, because that's going to add more and more pressure on the rates base. So, you know, we had submissions for you know, new sporting parks, new sporting facilities, and I will add that there is currently, and I believe that's just closed in recent times, so those that contributed to the community consultations around the sporting, you know, the draft plans for those, those documents will also aid some of the discussions in the future directions of sporting facilities and such for council. So the vehicle that we're using is similar to what we did last year. Let's Talk Scenic Rim, and those that are familiar have utilised it. I'll get that on the screen shortly. But also to cater for those that aren't necessarily tech savvy, we've got some manual forms completed out tonight, so that if you do have a submission now, you can complete that manually, and then that will be uploaded. Additionally, staff are here and we'll show you how to go through the iPad to input that as well. But we've thought of ways to sort of allow the maximum exposure to get those captured. What's important to note is this is not the only occasion for residents to make a submission. The submissions are being accepted through until 17th of May. So, you know, you don't have to make it tonight. We'll certainly give you all the assistance in how to make those submissions, but council will be accepting them until 17th of May. So if I go on to the, before going to that, so the intent tonight is what worked well last year was that there was a lot of Q&A session, and minimal speaking from the officers, but opening putting the mic out to the floor and starting to receive some of the feedback, good, bad, indifferent, on any aspects of the budget that we'll start to take on board, and then some of those will obviously be captured and turned into submissions, and then all those submissions will be collated. We will ask whether or not the submitter is willing to come to council and provide that you can personally deliver your submission towards the budget at an upcoming council meeting. And the other thing I forgot to note is part of the event tonight has actually been live streamed to allow those people that can't turn up physically here tonight. So, and it's being recorded for public viewing and community feedback purposes. If you have any issues around that or wish not to consent to that, please let us know, so that when we do provide the microphone to you, we can make it stand aside in one way so we can capture that in another way. Okay, so what I might do now is go on to, with the assistance of the staff upstairs, is go onto our Let's Talk Scenic Rim page. And when you go onto the Let's Talk Scenic Rim page, there's a number of campaigns that are currently open for community consultation. One of those I spoke about was the draft sport and recreation plan, but one we're interested in tonight is the draft 24-25 budget. So by clicking onto that, it takes you to that particular campaign around the consultation. It allows you to stay informed in terms of any updates to the consultation process by putting your email address on the top and subscribing. What I spoke about before, some of the general information about the budget, whilst we haven't produced a draft budget, but this is key. This is currently a document that's used for the 23-24 budget. So I think if you click on it, it opens it up in full. So this is a key document. For every $100 of rates that's collected by council, these are some of the key areas that fund those operations within council. Library services, everybody can affirm library services. There's a number of programs within the library services, not just books, but the outreach and the mobile libraries and the provision of the workspace and everything else. So for every $100 of general rates, $4.66 goes towards funding the libraries. You can see there from a big component, nearly half of all general rates will go towards the big ticket item of roads infrastructure network. And there's probably general perception out there that's probably not enough. But in terms of what we have in terms of our rate base, that's what's needed to be distributed in the way. So that's that component, and it gives you, there's further information about some of those services that are into those categories. But that's our main, that's what's structured in terms of we're providing. So it doesn't matter if the rates are last year's rates, this year's rates, that's a general trend in terms of what's the service that we're trying to fund. I'm not going to go through the whole the blurb there, but there is, as you read through the information, it does give you the necessary the timeframes around the budget. The other sessions, yeah, as mentioned before, we've got one in Boona, we've got one at Tamborine Mountain at the library, and with that, it allows you to start submitting online a submission form. And if we go to that, it takes about 5 minutes, depending on how big your submission is. But in most instances, it's fairly quick. So you click through the process by submitting a form, and it then takes you to, oops, we haven't registered, but generally when you sign in, now that's probably, I'll go to the start, but to use Let's Talk Scenic Rim, most people that have used it would be registered and logged in already. It doesn't take long to set up an account through the system, but I'm not sure if they've necessarily got the login up there, but what we might go through the PDF version of what the submission form looks like, which we've already also got some printed copies here. So there's if you're not going to go online, you can download the feedback form, and it's the same when you do it online. So you'll see the same interface. So basically, that rates on that $100 of rates in those services. What we've asked here is in terms of priorities, what do people see as their priorities, and ranking them from 1 to 9, I think. Yeah, 1 to 9, and that. There's a method around trying to calculate and trying to prioritise some of those services. So that's the first key engagement in terms of prioritising those key services. The next part is what we found more popular last year with general submissions around new infrastructure or new levels of service. This allows for residents to make a submission, similar to what I've seen in social media of recent times. A dog off leash park in Bow Desert, for example. Residents can put that in there, put a general concept around what it is, what the benefits are to the community. At the end, those submissions are compiled. Officers are able to provide councillors with estimates in terms of what are the build costs and what are the ongoing costs of that. So to make an informed decision about those, they can take those in considerations with everything else that's currently in the budget. And then that's pretty much it's a fairly straightforward submission form. So the opportunity to make, you can make more than one submission, but certainly council takes a really concerted effort in getting these tabulated and considered to allow the necessary consideration from council. That's pretty much the process. I don't have you know, the gist of what last year the headline figure about 7.9% rate increase and anything like that, because the draft budget we haven't reached a stage with councils in considering some of those. It's more around ascertaining what services the residents deem to be of priority in what we currently do, as well as seeking feedback on any new infrastructure that we currently don't have, or increased levels of service. Some suggestions maybe around additional bins for you know, food organic waste, separating those from your recycles and your general waste, but they're just sort of concept ideas. So any of those things that residents think council should consider because they may be being supplied or delivered by another council, we'll certainly look into and see what the aspects of those submissions are, and provide the necessary information to the elected members so they can make an informed decision around whether or not they should be included or considered as part of the budget now and in the future. That's the process. So prior to handing it over, David, was there any, other than that, we've got a number of mics on the floor, so if there's any sort of queries, we're certainly open to field any feedback. Apologies, one of the acting general manager, John's here, but one of the acting general managers is an apology today, Mark, so any planning related questions of the like may just need to be taken on notice unless other officers are able to field those. Yeah, cost shifting is a. Thanks for your question, Councillor Sanders. Councillor Sanders asked a question around what's the opinion on cost shifting. So I guess I'll start with defining those that don't know what cost shift is. It's a cost. It's basically that. It's shifting costs to local government, be it from a state or federal level, of undertaking a service that they were normally providing, and shifting that responsibility to the council. And in 99.99% of the times, they shift a service but don't shift any dollars to undertake those services. So that's an added burden in terms of, as I said before, you know, for every $100 of rates, we're currently funding those. So the consideration is council either increases the rates to fund those additional cost shift services, or you know, we go back and reduce some of those levels of service in those existing. A prime example of that is at the moment is, you know, we're still in the throes of seeing what the impacts of managing fire rents are on council. There's an agency out there that specifically deals with biosecurity, which is a state and federal funded program, but they're seeking councils now from 1 July that councils have to undertake the necessary identification and treatment on all council controlled assets of fire ants, as opposed to where they're currently, you know, that agency task force is doing that work now. From 1 July, they're getting council to do that work, and there's no added funding to undertake that work. So council will have to try and fund those activities within our own revenue streams, or you know, pass those costs on to the ratepayers to fund the provision of those services. The activities currently, so part of the task force agency, they go on council controlled land. If the fire ants are identified on those council controlled land, they will go in there, register them on GPS and track them, do a treatment on them, and then do the subsequent follow-up treatments. One of the things that the agency is providing, and it's not for an extended period of time, is they will provide council with some of the bait that's used to treat, but that doesn't go on forever though.
So who's doing the baiting? Is council officers doing the baiting, or are council officers doing the baiting, or are the fire ant teams doing the baiting?
At the moment, it's
At the
the
moment?
agency that are doing the treatment, but from 1 July, the expectation will be that council undertake the identification, treatment and follow-ups on council-controlled parks, lands and reserves, including road reserves and everything else like that. So,
Has a cost been estimated for that cost shifting? An
Not-
estimate?
not yet, no.
Rough cost?
Not yet, no, because we don't have the data in terms of that availability, in terms of what they've found in the region. We do have maps in terms of where they've been cited, but in terms of the activities themselves, that will be provided to council in due course to understand what the level of activity will be.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask, if there's no draft budget, how are we expected to give feedback? Can this be delayed until there is a draft budget? Not only this one, but the Tamborine Mountain and Boona one, so that residents do have an opportunity, because I only found out about this on Sunday and went onto the website and I thought I was stupid because I couldn't find the draft budget. And then I come here tonight to find out there is no draft budget, so how do we provide consultation? Or is this only a session to get budget initiatives that may come out?
That's correct. And in most part, what we found last year was that was the case. So we did present a draft budget last year, but out of the 41 submissions that we received, 2 of them only really questioned some of the metrics within the budget. The rest of them were initiative submissions. Apologies. And, this is the second time council's gone out. Very different to last year, but the circumstances are different again. If we had that time again, we're mandated by legislation to have in place a budget by 1 July. And we're right, the time frame between now and then there's a whole metrics of considering, because the expenditure, it's like balancing the home budget. You've got all the expenses and that's balanced by what that percentage increase in rates is. With 4 out of 7 elected members being new, there's a whole process around explaining the metrics and the process of how budgets are formed, and then to allow an understanding in terms of the delivery of some of these services, and ask the necessary questions of officers in that vetting process to ensure that the residents and ratepayers are getting a budget that's meeting the community expectations. So it is a little bit different. It's an abridged version. If you notice, it was only launched last week, because we only even though we didn't have a draft budget to provide to the elected members, we had the concept of it was either not going out for consultation because there was nothing to go out, or doing an abridged version of saying some priorities, but also continue the mechanisms for submission of any initiatives so that they can continue to be considered.
Okay, so in regards to initiatives and back onto the cost shifting, is it possible that in the budget report a section is provided in there on the cost shifted to council from state and federal for that budget?
Thank you. There will be a separate submission done apart from the budget submissions. There is a federal government inquiry on at the moment, which is an inquiry into the sustainability of local government. We're halfway, 3/4 of the way through the submission on that, and there will be a whole section there on cost shifting. Some of the cost shifting is very overt, as with the fire ants, it's likely to occur. Some of it's a bit more covert, where there are simple costs that have been passed on to us. There are other costs, as everyone may or may not be aware. The financial assistance grants often get put in our accounts 1 week before the end of the financial year, thereby skewing the entire system and the interpretation of it. So at the moment, we're putting in a submission to the local government, the inquiry into the sustainability of local government. This has also been acted on by LGAQ, who are very supportive of everything that's been written there at the same time. So the issue we've got to be careful of is that we're not cost shifting state. That one's a focus on federal government, and we can't really concentrate on the issues that the state government's raising at the same time, because you tend to get cost shifting occurring from the federal level. They put it down to the state, and then the state handball it to us. Okay, I hope that answers the question.
It does, thank you.
And I'll probably just use that one for one example, as it's one of those early ones that we got notice of. But in the past we've had where the state government, in terms of maintenance of their parks and reserve, national parks, they've tried to push the maintenance and the treatment of the pests and weeds to council. We don't have the necessary funding to do that, and certainly council will push back on it unless it comes with dollars attached. But they're just examples of some cost shifts at a high level. But until they sort of come back. But the first thing would always be by the councils to push back, or at least have with funding attached, not just a straight push of the job with no funding.
Thank you, General Manager. Appreciate that introduction, and I certainly sympathise with the timing associated with this particular budget. It is a challenge with the new council and the time that's meant. Can I ask just an overall high-level question regarding the service catalogue and the delivery of services? Is it anticipated that for the upcoming budget, whether that will become the standard and then delivery will be in addition to that, or are all services provided in the service catalogue up for negotiation?
No, thank you. That's a really good question. And I guess part of the, I should note, as whilst we have a service catalogue, it's really phase one of that overall project. It's just identifying the types of services that council currently deliver. Phase two of that discovery mode is linking those intricately to the budget in terms of the cost of delivery of those services. So, what we ask elected members is they've got a role to be strategic. So rather than say, well, slash $5 million in the budget, it's more about lower the levels of service on these ones, and that trickles down to the budget. So it's determining the levels of service and realising that what the community expects and what they're happy to forego if there was a reduction in those budgets, that suits the needs. The next stages of those the next stages of those service catalogue metrics are planned, and it's part of the onboarding with the new council is to go through some of that corporate planning of reviewing the corporate plan and the strategic directions of council, and then whether or not that impacts the delivery of some of those services contained. Because if we don't want to go and do phase two, and then the corporate planning, there's a slight difference to what's currently in there, then we'd have to do the service catalogue again. So it's about going through with the new council and defining what the corporate plan looks like, what they're wanting to achieve in the next 4 years and beyond, and then capturing that so that's captured accordingly. And then obviously from the corporate plan, you've got the annual operational plan, which is a report card on council, which is in terms of achieving some of those corporate objectives. And then that operational plan is then linked to the budget. But it's a really good question in terms of informing the community what the services. This is more phase one. It's identifying what services we do. Phase two and beyond will be having an intricate link in terms of the cost of service of delivering those.
I want to ask some questions about the fire ants again. What I've heard about fire ants and how it's an exploding cost, both federally, state and all around. It sounds like a bit of an NDIS thing to me. And as a ratepayer, I'm very, very concerned that it's been shifted down to our level because this is a real problem. I have planes flying over spraying for fire ants. I have people knocking on my door to come in and inspect. And it's a very, very big cost that's occurred in the last 5 years. And I think if it's going to be shifted down to council level, we really need to know as a ratepayer how much it's going to cost. I'm very, very concerned as a ratepayer that it's been shifted down to this level because we're rural people, we're on acreage, we're not in Sydney or Melbourne, and from there I'm just concerned. So can the council really take on board about the feedback to the ratepayers in Canungra, wherever? But we've got a lot of fire ant people working over around there at the moment, and we've had it like that for the last 2 years.
No, thank you for that question. And again, apologies for the acting General Manager, Customer and Regional Prosperity, because this is in his bailiwick in terms of the fire ants and biodiversity. And I guess some of the context that I can provide is it is a national funded thing. All other states contribute to the eradication of fire ants. It's only in recent times that those other states, like WA, have balked at providing further funding because they're not seeing positive results in terms of the eradication. So what that means is that task force's funding is being reduced. And what we spoke about in terms of, the council to then start dealing with our own reserves, our own road, shoulders, and everything else, there may be a different mechanisms for individual property owners that you're left to deal with those. If the task force is eradicated, we don't know what that looks like yet. So there is that, not just a potential cost shift to council, but to the general public when it comes to that regard. But we don't know that yet, and certainly council's been put on notice that this thing is coming, and as we approach it, certainly the more information will be put out there. We don't know what we know that some neighbouring councils are already taking some initiatives in terms of providing some assistance for their residents in doing it, but they've got mechanisms to fund those programs without necessarily passing those dollars on directly to the ratepayers. We're not necessarily in that same position as those councils. So, but we'll certainly, we've taken that on notice in terms of putting out some future releases and further information as that unfolds. Thank you. All right.
Thank you. While we're talking about initiatives, we are submitting there's a group of equestrian people who will be submitting to the draft sport and recreation plan. That will also be submitted into the draft to the draft budget as well, and that is a request for $30,000 for a business case for a Scenic Rim Equestrian Centre located around Beaudesert. The thing is that equestrian is probably one of the only sports that provides significant economy, a significant impact of the economy of any of the sports. It's estimated that this is way back in 2012 by the Regional Development Australia report. It's approximately $3,000 per horse going into the local economy. So we believe that a equestrian centre located in Beaudesert will provide additional money going into the Beaudesert and Scenic Rim economy, as well as being a self-sufficient equestrian centre that will be able to house the sports that are within the Scenic Rim, that being eventing, reining, cutting, pony club and all that sort of stuff. So with a $30,000 business case, we should be able to provide a decent report on the viability of a equestrian centre located in Beaudesert that will support the south of Queensland. So from Brisbane below, we've been speaking with Equestrian Queensland, who are very supportive, and they're currently starting their 5-year review of their 10-year facilities project. So they've already identified that there's a shortfall within the south of Brisbane area. So that'll be coming in, just to let you know.
No, I think that's, it certainly makes sense in driving around the Scenic Rim. There's synergies there with the number of horses and the number of already horsing-related activities. And I think, you recall in last year's budget process, when it comes to consideration, that council looked at it favourably. And I'm thinking about the development of the business case of the PCYC. So part of last year's budget initiative submissions, there was a submission there to request some funding towards the comprehensive business case, and I believe that was supported by council.
Yeah, the EQ report is that the Scenic Rim or Beaudesert area have the highest horse ownership per capita in Australia. Another initiative that was going to come in if something happened is that within the report we have the mayor and councillors' expenses contained within the budget report that comes out. I'll be submitting a request that the mayor's credit card be also listed within that report and within that section where the mayor and councillors' expenses are contained.
Yeah, I could probably provide some insight on that one. I guess part of our annual report, we're legislated to report on the expenses incurred by councils in their formal duties. And even though it's incurred in a credit card, it will still be captured as part of meetings and conferences and any other attendance. So those, in most parts, even if it's incurred in a credit card, it'll still be captured as part of the cost account.
But it should be costed against the mayor's position.
No, it is. So in the annual report, the mayor and the 6 divisional councils are listed. You know, in terms of remuneration, mileage in the vehicles, telecommunications, attendances and everything else. So those costs will be captured against that line, regardless of them being paid through accounts payable or the credit card. They're all costed in our ledger to the individual line councils. So I'll make sure that that's I believe that's how it's currently captured. But
okay, thank you.
Look, any sort of feedback, even any general queries, I know, and that's why I sort of made the disclaimer about planning ones, and I know one of the residents that came in, I wasn't able to answer some questions, but I put it in the right direction. But
Oliver, are you able to give an indication as to the overall global financial environment in which Council is preparing this budget? Not necessarily global, but more Queensland/Australia.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're a keen listener to the monthly financial reports, we certainly give a bit of an indication in terms of council's delivery into those, and some of those metrics are still present in the way we're determining and putting together a budget, because I mean, we're seeing rising costs continue, whilst at a high level, whilst the Reserve Bank Governor is moving with the interest rates, that's seeing a decline in the CPI. So even today, we had high CPI, Consumer Price Index figures, where that's a basket of goods and what they're expected to cost now. So we're seeing where we originally drafted the budget October, November last year, of having around 4 to 5% CPI. The March quarter CPI is currently now 3.4%. And with the council cost index, which is adding additional things based on council activities, is about 3.8%. But from the impacts on that is continuing to the logistics of materials, the pricing of materials where unit rates have increased just based on the factors, and we'll see that impact still, especially in the southeast for now up until 2032. And I guess that's part of the Olympics. So any projects, capital projects that are being built, there's certainly a drain on skilled labour to work on those projects, along with materials. So they impact council's delivery in any budget. Every year we go into a budget of outlaying anywhere between $30 to $40 million in capital works. And the majority of that is replenishing our capital works. As I said, we've got about $1.2 billion in assets, and maintaining those to a level where the conditions of them don't cause any safety concerns. We're seeing some of those maintenance costs and capital build costs increasing and going through the roof. So it is placing some strains on our budget and the way we put that budget together. 5 years ago, you could get 10 k's of road built for the same price as what it costs now for only 5 k's of road. So in sort of roundabout sort of sense. But I'm happy to sort of pass on to Chris.
So just talking about the cost of living, and obviously the RBA, did they raise rates today? No, so they didn't raise rates. So obviously the council has, I think, $42 million in debt. 43, I was close. Obviously in the past it was 6, 7, 8%. How does council forecast for an increase in rates on their $42 or $43 million?
That's a good question, and luckily the current council had a presentation last week from Queensland Treasury Corporation, who council is a financer of council, so we can only borrow through the Queensland Treasury Corporation, which is also the financier to the Queensland government. Unlike your Commonwealth or your big four banks, when council borrows money through the Queensland Treasury Corporation, it borrows at a fixed rate for the term of that loan. So unlike commercial banks, council has the opportunity to get loans at very low interest rates. And that's probably one of the examples of that was when a couple of years ago when council refinanced some of its legacy loans. Some of those loans were up as high as 8-9%, which is still low than what normal loans would have been with the major banks, but they were able to be refinanced down to below 2%, which made economical sense for council to participate in that. But and those rates are locked in. Council can borrow for a maximum duration of 20 years. So those rates are set at those loans, those debts are capped at that rate. So they're not variable, they're fixed. There may be a slight increase in some of the admin costs and the risk costs, but in most parts, it's a fixed cost, so we're able to forecast that into the budgets accordingly.
Does the Treasury allow you to refinance at any stage?
We refinanced last year, about 3 years ago. So we had refinanced some legacy loans, and those legacy loans were, as I said before, where some of them were sitting as high as 8-9%. So we were able to refinance those to below 2%. And the key was that council couldn't bank. So I guess part of the refinancing, council freed up just about $980,000 in interest and redemption costs. But the state government said that you can't have your cake and eat it too. So and these measures were part of the COVID measures in trying to stimulate the economy by putting more work. So part of that refinancing measure was that $980,000 was equivalent to financing a loan of $15 million. So council borrowed another $15 million in terms of identifying some key strategic projects to fund. Now, currently, there's still about $12 million of that 15 that hasn't been allocated to any particular projects. However, with the budget consultation and the sporting and community feedback, there's an avenue to potentially fund some of those projects. So we did refinance, but it came with a catch that we couldn't bank the savings.
Thank you. This question goes to the GM Works, or Environment and
Assets
EAS
and
or something. In regards, obviously the $51 out of every 100 goes towards roads and your area. We've seen a significant increase in the costs for asset renewal as well as new works. What sort of project management is now coming in to try and stem the tide of cost overruns?
I'm glad you asked that question. It opens the door to a nudge I got earlier with regard to discussions around some of the impacts that we've had over the last couple of years. And one of them, I know Oliver touched on, the cost increases that we've seen. Something that I really would like to mention is the impacts we've had as a result of the weather events we've had over a number of years. Certainly not going to stand here and say that our roads are in the best condition that they've been. Definitely understand that we've still got quite a bit of work to do on not only our sealed road network but our unsealed road network as a result of previous weather events. And certainly with that, we've still got $40+ million to deliver in that. We've also got the events of the Christmas storm event, as well as the associated rainfall that occurred at that time, as well as the rainfall in January. That took a number of our crews off the delivery that they were programmed to do, and they've only just finished the emergent works that would be funded through the DRFA. I will get to your question very shortly, but you opened the door, so I'll walk through it. So with that, we're now staring down actually delivering works on roads that may have additional damage that will actually look quite interesting when we go to deliver. So we've got a number of roads where they've seen additional damage as a result of the two events, more recent events, but we're dealing with another 4 events prior to that. So we'll end up repairing potentially 60% of the road. The reason we'll do that is because we need to manage the risk of non-approval of what we actually are planning to do. So there is a slight chance that some of what we pick up or actually plan to do may not get funded by the state and federal government through the disaster recovery arrangements, of which the state funds 25% and the federal government funds 75%. So that sort of will go a little way towards the standard that our road network is at the moment. Now, in answer to the question, we're certainly within the draft budget. We are proposing putting forward a new software system that will actually assist in managing and delivering, or at least the data that we collect with regard to how our progress is going with the delivery of each of our projects. I will add with that too that back 20 years ago, you could actually put a budget together, design and build pretty much a project in a 12-month period. Whereas now, it's really a 3-year period, if not 4 years. You have, in some instances, negotiations with resumptions, which can take greater than 12 months. You also have negotiations with public utility providers where years gone by, you may not have necessarily had to pay a great deal for an upfront design, but there's certainly that sort of aspect is coming into play now. So so in answering to your question, we're certainly looking towards an updated process and system in place to actually not only inform the council but also the members of the public, but better align with our own internal resources to let us know where we're situated. I think on last count this year, we're actually delivering on 400 plus separate capital projects, some ranging from $10,000 right through to your multi-million-dollar projects, as the Beaudesert Town Centre revitalisation is. So that probably answers your question to a degree. We haven't rested on what that program or IT system will be, but certainly over the coming months, if it gets approved in the budgets, that's where we'll be heading.
Yeah, thank you. As the planning GM's not here, it'll probably go to the CO for this one, but we've seen a significant increase in the development applications for new blocks within the Beaudesert area, as per the growth management strategy. Considering the growth coming to Beaudesert, has there been additional funding potentially allocated to look at the parkland and new facilities for these subdivisions?
Probably from a financial sense, I guess, with any of those new developments, part of the cost to those developments is a contribution towards infrastructure charges. At the moment, I think that sits at about $30,000, but council doesn't get all that because Scenic Rim, even though we're a 1.042% shareholder in urban utilities, half of that money will go to urban utilities for upkeep of, towards the water and sewage contribution. But some of those aspects in terms of funding some of that trunk infrastructure is incorporated as part of that revenue.
So in a bit more detail, we understand we've currently got what is the Local Government Infrastructure Plan, or commonly known as the LGIP. We had a major review of that last year, and some funding has been allocated to do a major review of that. Included in that, council was successful in getting some state funding via the Department of Transport and Main Roads, where we're looking towards updating our 2014 footpaths and cycleways strategy, which will inform a broader strategy covering off on our major transport infrastructure. So we're certainly in that. It will certainly highlight where investment is required for not only transport infrastructure but other infrastructure relating to parks. It is interesting though, we are somewhat constrained on what the developer contributions can fund in some of the asset classes. So for parks, it's really the land and limited to some facilities within the parks, and more for sporting infrastructure, it's more just the land itself. So there are some limitations on what we can use developer contributed funds to fund. However, in the update of the LGIP, we certainly will have a better understanding of where the funding is required to be invested.
Thank you. It's sort of answered a few, but I think the CEO is going to come on. Is infrastructure charges that we receive enough for our long-term plan, or should there be changes?
LGAQ is doing another review into developer contributions at this point in time around infrastructure charges. So we're participating with them to make sure we can put in a submission to have them reviewed. The argument is if there is this growth occurring through shaping South East Queensland, then there should be appropriate resources put in. In the greenfield areas, there is the opportunity to try and get good recreational infrastructure in there. The challenge for all councils over the next 12 months is we'll probably be dealing with 2 elections. The state government election in October and the yet to be determined federal government election. That means there probably won't be a lot of funding available because each of them will be in election mode, promising whatever they're going to deliver in the future. The promise means it takes time. If there is a change of government at either end, that will take even more time by the time they set up new departments with new names for different programs of funding and everything else. So that's where our challenge sits. We really are coming to the end where we're winding up a lot of state government funded projects. We haven't even put in an application, if I'm not mistaken, for the new level of federal government funding. Is that the precinct one? Yeah, I don't think we've even put one in. I don't think it's been called for at this point in time. So there is going to be a gap there where it turns around it's going to be a bit of no man's land or whatever. It's going to be in limbo and before we can find out what those funding applications are actually going to be. And it will be important for Council, again through the inquiry into the sustainability of local government, to argue that we should not be required to put in matching funding every time or a proportion of funding, 70-30, etc. It'd be really helpful from Council's perspective to simply get more FAGs or financial assistance grants funding that comes through. That would be the best outcome rather than being in competitive grants, which we're up against councils twice our size, who realistically can get on with life without having to get a grant, whilst we're in this situation where we want to try and get as many grants as we can. But if we can't deliver and can't report on the grants, then they're not going to help us a great deal, nor if we can't find the matching funds.
And I've just got some notes here, and I think follow-ons from that discussion, and I guess some of the questions, the query that the CEO stated about the complexities in budgets and the delivery. One of those factors is, if anything, if it's a shining light, is, in the delivery of those works or those projects, what we've seen over a number of years is the employment market that's constricted somewhat, and it's had an impact on the number of vacancies that we had. And I think in recent time today, even it was mentioned that there's a change in that, and we're starting to get those vacant positions filled. So that'll help in the delivery of some of those key projects, because a lot of those skilled, it's a competitive market out there. There's a lot of bigger councils out there that will just dangle the carrot or more dollars, where Scenic Rim can't simply compete against that market. So there's been sort of those. That's one of those the competitive. That's one of those restrictions in terms of the budgets. But I think also more importantly for those that sort of we're not just setting what we're providing today in a draft budget. It's not just a budget for 24-25 financial year, but it's 9 years after that as well, in trying to forecast as best possible where we can, 9 years out. And there will be fluctuations in between, but we're trying to, with these strategy documents that council are getting into place, it's trying to smooth those out as much as possible to try and identify when those things come online. You know, as developments come online, we're going to require more parks and more facilities, but we should be able to start forecasting that at some point in time when they're approved by today's council, that they may be in line in at least 5, 6 years, 10 or years that they'll come online, and then start forecasting as part of that LGIP of when they may be due to come online, so that you know, they're being factored into those budgets, so that they don't become a bit of a shock when they do come online. But yeah, the 10-year forecast, as much as we try and put as much foresight into what that looks like, there will be a requirement to have some fluidity into that process, because at the end of the day, what we can sort of mark or forecast out as best we can is the assets and how our asset base is growing. I think the figure touted today was for 24-25, and the 9 years after that, there's about $350 million in the capital works program over that 10 years. We'd love to have another, I think we're behind about 60 million, but we've got to start somewhere, and that's, you know, if we do get any more handouts in terms of non-competitive grants, that would be you know, a boost to what we can fund, because at the moment we've got projects 1,000 deep, and there may be some suggestions to consider certain roads, but in the hierarchy of things, council would need to consider where that falls when it comes to the priority, because there's 999 other projects in front of it that, in order to fund it, someone's got to either be dropped back and that elevated, and then you make one person happy, but you may make 10 people not as happy. So it is a delicate balancing act, and we do only have a limited set of funds that we can play with in terms of you know, pushing those costs back to the residents. One of the key other factors, you know, for every $100 in tax income that the federal government gets, the distribution that the federal government uses and the state government use and the local government use, we get $3 out of the $100 in taxation that the federal government collects. Local government gets $3 to play with. And when you look at, you know, in terms of cost shift and everything else, if you look at the infrastructure that councils have to maintain, at the end of the day, it becomes a user pay, and that the residents are having to contribute to maintain it. And it might not necessarily be the residents that use up the infrastructure. But
Thank you. You touched on my next question, which was the staff EBA. Is that due in the 24-25 budget?
no, we're currently as part of that. The negotiation will start in the calendar year, I believe, John, in January 2025, and that will then flow into the future budgets in whatever that's determined. But
Thank
currently,
you.
we've got an EB in place that covers 24-25 financial year. Oh, I think when you finished, the lady behind you was also.
About Ferguson Road, Kreiner. What's happening with it? Because it was Ferguson Road, Kreiner. It was an executed infrastructure agreement out of the Nielsen quarries. It was the 3 quarries, and it was to be built as a community thing.
Yes, look, I'm not up to date with the latest. If our other GM was here, he'd certainly be able to provide some information. I certainly am aware that there are conversations occurring. I'm probably not in a position to say anything more than that, and leave it at that, because we are dealing with other individuals involved in the process, and would rather just say that we're certainly aware of, from my end, what is to be done there, but certainly not able to provide any timing or anything with that.
Just talking about increasing infrastructure costs, and the costs going up and up and up. Ferguson Road, Kreiner was supposed to be nearly finished by 2019. So we've been sitting here waiting, and the trucks have been on Kreiner Road, and there is a lot of trucks on Kreiner Road. wondering why it's outstanding to the ratepayers, because the ratepayers aren't paying for it. It was part of the Nielsen Quarry approvals for the soil batching plant, building the concrete operations and the trucks associated with it, and increasing the extraction from the quarry. So
Yeah.
it was to be done by 2019,
Yeah.
2020.
Yeah.
We're now 2024. The costs have gone, and I'm worried that A, it's not going to be built. B, I'm hoping that the ratepayers aren't going to bear any cost to that road. So that's why I'm asking this quite direct question to you. Why is it taking 5 years to get to this point? Why isn't the road built?
So certainly we'll get your details and get those that actually have a bit more. Actually, if you go down the back when we're finished, they'll take your details and we'll be able to answer or provide the information that we can on the question that you've asked.
It's an executed infrastructure agreement.
Yeah.
It should have been completed in the time frame.
And I'm certain as part of the new council, they'll ask for a full briefing on that, so the necessary briefing to get them up to speed. So, yep. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And it is still outstanding.
Yep.
And as a ratepayer, I don't want to get to a point where someone says, oh, we've got this much money, but the ratepayers have got to pay for the rest to get it built. I don't want to be in that position where we have to foot the bill when it was part of an executed infrastructure agreement and it should have been completed by now.
Yep. We'll get that information and have that provided necessarily.
Talking about all your costs and all the costs of the roads and everything. And that's one thing that's sitting there that could have been built and there was no cost to the ratepayers, as far as I understand.
Yeah. Well, so we'll get the necessary information and provide that back. So, thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, okay.
That's good.
Perhaps a question. It's probably more to the council laws, but it came from a comment made by the General Manager of Asset and Environmental Sustainability about multi-year projects and the carryovers, and that there are several multi-year projects that are currently in progress. Will the council commit to the delivery of those multi-year projects in the ensuing year or years?
For those unfamiliar, I'll provide some context prior to providing. So what Ms Enright is referring to is, as I said before, when council adopts your standard budget, we adopt anywhere between the $30 to $40 million in standard capital works. But at the moment, last year we carried forward over a number of years accumulation of capital works that have been approved in prior budgets that hadn't been completed, but carried forward those into the budget. And last year was $32 million in our standard capital works delivery, but then the carry forward budgets is currently sitting at about $102 million. So, there's about $80 million in carry forward works. So that's, in context, that's what we're referring to, the works forward. But
Yes.
the delivery side?
Yeah, so I won't answer on behalf of the councils, but I will say that a number of those carryover projects are hinged or co-contributed projects from either the state or federal government. A fair portion of the number that Oliver mentioned then was related to the flood restoration program. We've got funding for the Badesett Town Centre revitalisation. We've got funding for Hinchcliffe Bridge, Cangoon Bridge and Kerry Road. There are also some black spot funded projects here in town, upgrading of intersections to roundabouts. So, and some of those are in excess or up to 100% externally funded. So that's probably where a number of those bigger projects are already hinged to funding agreements. So I can only say that the impact of not doing them wouldn't see that amount of money then returned to council for contributing to other projects because they're hinged on those projects that they're associated with. Apart from that, I'm not going to make any further comment on what council or's thoughts are on carryover projects, other than reiterating what I said earlier around the fact that we had 3 months at the start of this year where we had a number of resources deflected away from otherwise capital projects that they would have been delivering to actually meet the QRA guidelines around a 90-day period of time. We get to do emergent works to make safe our road network.
I think also what's important to note is that you can't adopt 10% of the budget this year and adopt 50% next year and 50. So when there's a project's identified, funding or not, you know, based on the accounting standards and everything else, you have to adopt 100% of that budget at this budget, knowing full well that it may take a couple of years to deliver that project, but to get the commitment to allow the necessary planning from a procurement and sourcing and everything else, you know, officers need to have that endorsement, that approval from day one to allow that process. The delivery might take over 3 years, but you need that approval from 1 July to say, yep, that road, it's been endorsed for $5 million, even though you're only going to spend $300,000 this year, and then you're going to spend $4 million and then the balance over the other year. So they're delivered over multi-years, but part of our reporting in our monthly, we always report that whilst we've got $100 million, $30 million is expected to be delivered over multi-years beyond the current 12 months.
It's like cameras. About the biosecurity, what's the sort of strategy you've got going forward now that we're getting very close to the biosecurity plan being adopted finally? And how are we going to proceed with the increasing numbers of feral animals in the Scenic Rim, including pigs?
I've got to remember, Kath, and I think I remember now, the biodiversity strategy is due to be completed and presented. Biosecurity.
Biodiversity was adopted, I think, by council.
Yeah,
it's the biosecurity one that's been outstanding for...
Yeah, that one's due to be presented to councillors before the end of this financial year. So the major reason was the inclusion about the commentary around fire ants in there, I believe. And again, I'm going on what I've read through there. Your broader question, so that's that bit in relation to the pigs and whatnot.
And the strategy. Does council have a strategy moving forward? Is it on your radar?
No, it's very much on the radar. Very much looking at a pest, plant, and animal strategy against dealing with some of those animals and the weeds and whatnot through there. There's something that we're looking at which I don't want to sort of publicise at the moment, but it may be something that has a dual approach to fire ants and dealing with pest, plant and animals as well. And hopefully that shouldn't be too far off.
All right. Be good to talk to you about it.
I think one of the important strategies that's developed has made the popularity of the Scenic Rim for people to invest and buy in has attracted some landowners that don't necessarily have the right skills to maintain some of those smaller blocks, and obviously that's one of the strategies. And that's the weekend, I forgot the terminology that was used for them, weekend warriors or blockies or something, I think they were colloquially. Yeah, and so the issue is the landowners are doing the right job, but it's the neighbouring ones that don't do anything that then continue to play downside. So that's part of that strategy in terms of where there's further enforcements and everything else. So certainly take that as well. And once that plan gets provided to council for endorsement, the consultation and necessary awareness of that will be put forward. Thank you. Any other questions? David, do you want to sort of... No. Well, yeah, we do have one at the back. I mentioned before, in the current budget, 23-24, council committed to providing money to the working committee that council is a part of for them to develop a business case. Part of the process last year has been identification of a suitable site That, and I'll hand over to Chris because he knows more, and so that was earmarked for a site. A submission was provided to the state in terms of deeming that, and I'll hand over to Chris to give us a quick update on that one.
So we've received approval for the land management plan. Next stage is working through with the PCYC Queensland and locally around the next step. So we'll certainly be looking at entering, subject to PCYC being happy with that, with a lease arrangement, which will then enable them to move forward. But realistically, we're a partner in this and not necessarily the deciding body. So I might hand over to David. Do you want to add anything to that?
State government announced last year $5 million for the PCYC. They're going to need a bit more than that. Yeah, they're going to need a lot more than that. So I mentioned before there's two things happening, two elections. Now's a really, really good time to be pushing that along. I attended, as did Councillor Sanders and the Mayor, the principal workshop at Beaudesert High the other morning. The PCYC is very high on the agenda there as well because it's seen as part of a comprehensive approach to dealing with some of the issues that arise at any sort of secondary school. All righty.
Look, thank you again for attending tonight, and certainly that's the intent of it, is that discussion piece, it's the awareness piece. Obviously, in the different areas that we go and roll this through, there'll be different queries and different feedback provided, but all is certainly worthy and appreciated. And going forward, we've taken a number of actions, certainly some information pieces, not necessarily budget related, but we'll make sure that they're attended to and that right information is provided. Next stage now is as mentioned before, we've got a workshop on Thursday at Boona, and then on the following Monday up at Tamborine Village at the library. Tamborine Mountain up at the Tamborine Library. Following that, the process will be, we'll collate all the submissions, and I said the submissions are open until 17th of May. So, you know, go in there and certainly put those submissions forward, or encourage the groups, individuals to put those submissions forward. We'll collate all those and present those to council to allow any necessary consideration. So thank you again. If there's no other questions, we'll call it a night. Thank you.